For a stretch of days now, moving through the first week of August 2026, something unusual has been showing up in the global earthquake data. Not a spike, not a swarm. The opposite. Multiple consecutive days have passed without a single earthquake of magnitude 6 or higher recorded anywhere on the planet. A genuinely uncommon stretch, given that a magnitude 6 or larger earthquake happens somewhere on Earth roughly every 3 days on average across a normal year. Global monitoring agencies have been logging days of activity described plainly as moderate, and in some 24-hour windows, explicitly lower than an average day. On the surface, that sounds like good news. Fewer earthquakes, less shaking, less damage. But talk to seismologists who study the long-term behavior of active fault systems, and the reaction to a lull like this is rarely simple relief. Because in the deep history of earthquake science, a quiet stretch along a heavily stressed, historically active zone is not automatically a sign that danger has passed. Sometimes it's the exact opposite signal. Today, we're breaking down what the current data actually shows, why seismologists take quiet periods seriously rather than treating them as good news by default, and what the honest, non-sensationalized science says about what a lull like this can and cannot tell us about what comes next. Drop a comment right now. If you live along the Ring of Fire or any other major fault system, tell me whether it's felt unusually quiet or unusually active to you personally these past few weeks. And if you want to know the moment this changes, subscribe right now. It's free. A thumbs up helps enormously. Let's get this to 5,000 likes so it reaches the people who need to see it. Now, let's get into it. What the data actually shows right now: global seismic monitoring services have been tracking earthquake activity in daily and monthly summaries for years, and the numbers for the current stretch are worth laying out plainly. Multiple consecutive daily reports through the start of August have recorded 0 earthquakes of magnitude 6 or higher worldwide, with global activity levels for several of those days explicitly categorized as moderate, and at least one recent 24-hour window described as low compared to a typical day. To be clear about scale, this does not mean the planet has gone silent. Earthquakes below magnitude 5 continue at their usual enormous volume, hundreds of magnitude 3 and 4 events every single day. Because small earthquakes happen constantly and represent the ordinary background hum of a tectonically active planet. What's specifically absent is the upper tier, the magnitude 6+ events that represent genuinely significant energy release, the kind capable of causing serious damage near population centers. Historically, a magnitude 6 or larger earthquake occurs somewhere on Earth roughly once every 3 days, when averaged across a full year. A run of multiple consecutive days without one is not unheard of. These gaps happen periodically, simply due to the naturally uneven, clustered way earthquakes are distributed in time. But it is uncommon enough that seismologists studying specific regional fault systems, rather than the planet as a whole, pay close attention when a segment that has been historically active suddenly goes still for an extended stretch. Why quiet makes seismologists nervous instead of relieved. This is the part of the story that surprises people who assume less shaking simply means less risk. In seismology, there's a well-documented and genuinely debated phenomenon called seismic quiescence, a measurable drop in the rate of small to moderate earthquakes along a specific fault segment, sometimes observed in the years, months, or in rarer documented cases, the weeks before a larger earthquake eventually ruptured that same segment. The idea behind it is mechanically straightforward, even if the predictive reliability is not. As stress builds toward the breaking point of the rock along a fault, some researchers have proposed that the fault can temporarily lock more tightly, essentially seizing up rather than continuing to release small amounts of stress through minor slippage, which shows up in the data as a drop in background seismicity right before the eventual larger rupture releases everything at once. Here's the honest, necessary caveat, and it's the single most important thing to understand about this entire topic. Seismic quiescence is a real, published, and actively studied pattern in the scientific literature, but it is not a reliable earthquake predictor, and mainstream seismology treats it with significant caution for good reason. The overwhelming majority of quiet periods along active fault systems are followed by absolutely nothing unusual. They're simply quiet periods, statistical noise in an inherently uneven process, and the fault eventually returns to its normal background activity level, without any major event following. Retrospective studies that identify quiescence before a specific major earthquake are looking backward with the benefit of already knowing the outcome, a pattern that's much harder to use reliably going forward in real time. The seismological community has spent decades investigating whether quiescence could ever become a genuine forecasting tool, and the consistent, sobering conclusion is that earthquake prediction, meaning a specific time, location, and magnitude forecast issued before an event happens, remains beyond current scientific capability, full stop, regardless of what pattern is being observed in the lead-up. So why does this lull still matter? If quiescence isn't a reliable predictor, why are scientists paying attention to the current lull at all rather than dismissing it entirely? The answer is that the current absence of magnitude 6+ activity is being watched not because it predicts anything specific with confidence, but because of what it means for accumulated stress across the planet's most active fault systems in the meantime. Tectonic plates do not stop moving during a quiet earthquake stretch. The Pacific Plate, the Nazca Plate, the Indo-Australian Plate, all of the major plates bordering the Ring of Fire and the broader Alpide belt, continue grinding against their neighbors at their usual rates of several centimeters per year, regardless of how many earthquakes are currently being recorded. When the release valve of moderate to large earthquakes goes quiet for an extended stretch, the accumulated strain along the world's most active fault segments does not pause alongside it. It keeps building. The same underlying mechanism behind the elevated San Andreas stress levels and the Campi Flegrei unrest we've covered on this channel before, just observed here at a global rather than a single fault scale. This is why seismologists describe a global lull in significant earthquake activity as worth monitoring rather than celebrating. It's not that the quiet period itself is dangerous. It's that the quiet period does not represent a pause in the underlying tectonic forces that produce earthquakes in the first place, and a return to normal or above normal activity, whenever it comes, arrives against a backdrop where stress has continued accumulating uninterrupted the entire time. What the Ring of Fire specifically has looked like this year. Context matters here because the current lull is landing after a year that has already produced some of the most significant individual earthquake disasters in recent memory. Earlier in 2026, a massive earthquake sequence devastated Venezuela. A major earthquake and tsunami warning struck Japan's Sanriku coast. A magnitude 7.3 to 7.4 rupture in Indonesia's Malacca Sea triggered a tsunami and left more than 450 structures damaged or destroyed. A magnitude 6.8 struck Kyushu near Kumamoto, a region with its own documented history of staged fault rupture. Chile saw a cluster of moderate to strong earthquakes along its coastline. This is a year that has, if anything, demonstrated the Ring of Fire operating at a genuinely active pace across multiple regions simultaneously. Against that backdrop, a sudden multi-day stretch without a single global magnitude 6+ event stands out precisely because of the contrast. It's not that the planet has been unusually quiet all year. It's that a year of significant, well-distributed seismic activity has, for the moment, hit a pause in its largest events specifically. The kind of shift in pattern that draws scientific attention specifically because it breaks from what the rest of the year has been showing. The honest bottom line. Let's be precise about what can and cannot be said here, because this is exactly the kind of story that gets distorted into false certainty in either direction. It would be inaccurate to say this lull guarantees a major earthquake is imminent somewhere on the Ring of Fire. Seismic quiescence has never been validated as a reliable short-term predictor, and the vast majority of quiet periods resolve without anything unusual following them. It would be equally inaccurate to dismiss the lull as meaningless because the tectonic stress driving earthquake activity in the first place has not paused, and a return to normal seismic activity, whenever it happens, will be releasing energy that has continued accumulating the entire time the surface data looked calm. What seismologists are actually doing right now, and what genuinely useful monitoring looks like in practice, is watching specific regional fault systems. The ones already flagged as carrying elevated stress from independent lines of evidence, the San Andreas and San Jacinto systems in California, the Marmara segment beneath Istanbul, the fault networks beneath Kyushu, rather than treating a single global statistic as a forecast on its own. The global lull is a real, documented feature of the current data. It is a reason for continued attention, not a reason for either panic or reassurance on its own. What you can actually do with this information, if you live along any major fault system, whether that's the Ring of Fire specifically or one of the other major seismic belts we've covered on this channel, the practical guidance does not change based on whether the world is in an active stretch or a quiet one. Earthquake preparedness needs to be a standing baseline, not a reaction to a particular week's headlines. Know your evacuation routes, have emergency supplies accessible, know how to shut off your gas line, secure heavy furniture and water heaters, have a family communication plan for when mobile networks go down. These steps matter exactly as much during a quiet stretch as during an active one, because the honest truth about earthquake science is that neither scientists nor any forecasting model can currently tell you which day the next significant earthquake will strike. Only which regions carry elevated long-term risk based on accumulated stress and historical rupture patterns. Final thought. The Ring of Fire has not gone quiet in any meaningful geological sense. The tectonic plates that define it are moving today exactly as they were moving during the active, headline-making stretch of earthquakes earlier this year. What's changed for now is simply the rate at which that ongoing movement is being released through significant earthquakes. A pattern that has, historically and inconsistently, sometimes preceded larger events and far more often simply preceded a return to normal background activity with nothing unusual following at all. Scientists are watching this lull not because they can tell you what it means with certainty, but because pretending it means nothing would ignore decades of documented, if imperfect, patterns in how active fault systems behave in the run-up to significant events. The responsible position, the one this channel is built around, is neither panic nor dismissal. It's staying informed, understanding what the data can and cannot tell us, and treating preparedness as a constant rather than something you only think about once the ground starts moving again. We'll be tracking this closely, and we'll bring you the update the moment global seismic activity shifts out of this pattern. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and drop that comment. Tell me what it's felt like where you are. Let's get this to 5,000 likes so it reaches the people who need to see it. See you in the next one.